Picture the Los Angeles skyline as it once was in the 1940s, faint neon glows, vintage cars rolling down wide boulevards, and a sultry jazz tune drifting out of a late-night radio show. Somewhere, in all that urban hum, Barbara Stanwyck, the steely-eyed leading lady who enthralled audiences in Double Indemnity, was a top-billed name on every marquee. She played icy femme fatales and iron-willed ranchers who seemed to fear nothing. But the real Barbara Stanwyck, once she tore herself away from the camera lights, longed for a quiet refuge. She wanted a sanctuary hidden far from prying eyes and Hollywood chatter. So what did that safe haven look like? How did a woman who radiated such intensity on screen choose to live when the director yelled "cut" and the makeup lights dimmed? Most classic Hollywood buffs have heard whispers of a certain hacienda-style estate perched in Fryman Canyon, in the heart of the San Fernando Valley near Studio City. Tucked into the rolling hillsides, it was a location that felt remote while being only a quick drive from the major studios. A perfect combination for an actress who valued both her work and her privacy. The property itself, often referred to in local lore as Barbara Stanwyck's Hideaway, was a Spanish revival marvel that spoke quietly of old California missions. Think red-tiled roofs, thick white stucco walls, and a courtyard paved in weathered stone. An orange grove dotted one side of the property, filling the air with citrusy notes whenever the breeze lifted. A modest but sparkling pool glimmered in the inner garden, providing just enough respite from that relentless California sun. Unlike the over-the-top extravagance some stars craved, this estate was an oasis that seemed designed for introspection, an echo of Barbara Stanwyck's own personality, which was famously no-nonsense and often private to a fault. If you were to climb up the winding driveway, shielded by lush landscaping that muffled the sounds of the city below, you might catch your first glimpse of the home's red roof tiles peeking through the foliage. The approach alone feels like stepping onto a movie set, parted palm fronds revealing a glimpse of whitewashed walls as if you've discovered a hidden desert mission. But that initial dramatic impression quietly gives way to an understated courtyard where time slows to a gentle, unhurried pace. A few simple terracotta planters stand guard by the front entrance, brimming with succulents and small flowers that bring subtle color to the otherwise earth-tone palette. For Barbara Stanwyck, who was rumored to arrive home at odd hours, fresh from some late-night shoot, this courtyard might have been her first breath of freedom from the demands of the studio. Inside, the living space is surprisingly spacious, without screaming wealth and luxury. Expansive arches separate the rooms in classic Spanish Revival style, and the floors are made of old terracotta tiles that stay cool beneath your feet, even in the scorching California heat. The living room is anchored by a broad fireplace, not overly ornate but inviting enough for a star to curl up on a worn leather sofa after a long day. On the walls, you might see evidence of Stanwyck's love for Western motifs, an affinity she nurtured during her roles in ranch-set dramas and Western TV series. A painting or two of galloping horses, a pair of cowboy boots propped against a bookshelf, or even a vintage saddle might add a subtle nod to that frontier spirit she was known for in classics like The Big Valley. Indeed, that down-to-earth quality was something Stanwyck cultivated once she was free from the spotlight. Post-divorce from Robert Taylor, Barbara Stanwyck had chosen to live alone, and from many accounts that suited her. The open floor plan of the living areas, leading into a dining space that overlooked the canyon, didn't exist for lavish Hollywood parties. She was never one to gather an entourage just to show off her digs. If you were invited here, you were a close friend, a fellow actor who understood her preference for genuine conversation and easy companionship, rather than orchestrated glamour. While some stars of her caliber installed crystal chandeliers the size of automobiles in bathrooms, lined with gold fixtures, Stanwyck's personal style favored authenticity. Exposed wooden beams on the ceiling, simple but sturdy furniture, and a sense that everything in the room was chosen for comfort rather than spectacle. A quick walk down a tiled hallway takes you to the bedrooms, each with a view of the property's lush surroundings. They're not massive by celebrity standards, but they feel welcoming. The kind of rooms where you could imagine reading late into the night or scribbling notes in a well-worn journal. Barbara's own bedroom was said to have large windows framing the orchard and glimpses of the glittering city lights in the distance. More than one visitor marveled at how the hush of the canyon seemed almost surreal, given how close it was to the hustle of Ventura Boulevard. If you cracked a window on a quiet evening, you might catch the faint hum of traffic far below, a gentle reminder that civilization was near, but not near enough to intrude upon the stillness. That stillness was crucial to Stanwyck. After years of front-page headlines and a busy schedule shaped by studio contracts, she cultivated her privacy with almost as much passion as she brought to her roles. People close to her claimed she had a strong independent streak that led her to handle everyday tasks most stars would delegate. From gardening to small repairs, Barbara wasn't afraid to roll up her sleeves if the job needed doing. It's said she once told a friend she found weeding the orange grove meditative, that it cleared her head and kept her grounded in a world of illusions. Sometimes the press would spin this as eccentric or overly reclusive, but for Stanwyck, it was simply how she approached life, direct, honest, and fully in control. A visitor stepping into the backyard might first notice the orchard, where orange trees stood proudly against the backdrop of sun-bleached hills. Morning light filtering through leaves gave the space a soft golden glow, and the sweet citrusy aroma was an instant mood lifter. The courtyard, where a small fountain bubbled, connected seamlessly to a turquoise swimming pool. Not the monstrous kind you'd see in celebrity magazines, but a modest oasis perfect for quick dips in the summer heat. On a table nearby, you might spot a wide-brimmed hat or a pair of gloves left behind after a gardening session. This was Stanwyck's realm of self-reliance, where she found a joy that only grew deeper as she aged. Over the years, these walls witnessed some fascinating chapters of cinematic history. The living room was likely where Stanwyck read the script for The Big Valley, her iconic role as matriarch Victoria Barkley that would grace TV screens in the mid-1960s. When she signed on, she was no stranger to westerns, having starred in numerous frontier-themed pictures, but this one ended up reintroducing her to an entirely new audience. It's not hard to picture her pacing the floor, lines in hand, practicing that unbreakable tone that would define her character on the small screen. And after she finished her rehearsals, it was here, in the quiet warmth of her canyon hideaway, that she'd let go of the persona and simply be Barbara. Some big Hollywood names passed through these rooms too. Friends like Henry Fonda and William Holden are rumored to have visited, though the stays were never extended. Stanwyck wasn't the sort to host drawn-out soirees. Her brand of hospitality was more personal, a shared cup of coffee at the breakfast nook overlooking the valley, or a quick conversation in the courtyard before politely showing guests out. She was that rare star who didn't need constant adulation or epic gatherings to feel valued. Instead, she cultivated relationships one-on-one, respecting her own boundaries as fiercely as she respected her friends' and colleagues' privacy. At some point, the house became the center of a turning point in Stanwyck's life. As major studios shifted and her longtime contracts ended, she found herself stepping back from the relentless cycle of production that had defined Hollywood's golden age. While some actors clung desperately to limelight, Stanwyck chose a quieter road. She accepted fewer roles, focusing on projects she found genuinely interesting. Her hacienda on the hillside became more than just a place to rest her head. It was a fortress of solitude, a shield against an industry that could be fickle. Neighbors might occasionally glimpse her black sedan rolling up the winding drive, or see her wave hello while she watered her garden, but otherwise she lived largely unbothered, almost as though she had never been a household name. In later years, the property's fate took on a life of its own. Rumors swirled about whether it would be sold or passed down. Real estate aficionados who appreciate Spanish Revival architecture salivated over the notion of acquiring such an untouched gem. There was talk of a listing that pinned its value somewhere between $5 million and $7 million, a price that might well be higher now if the estate still retains its authentic detailing. In an area susceptible to modern renovations, where people often bulldoze older homes to build steel and glass palaces, Stanwyck's former residence stands out as an increasingly rare example of old California style. From the carved wooden doors to the wrought iron sconces that line the hallway, it's a testament to a design philosophy that embraced warmth and character over ostentatious embellishments. Those iron sconces? They might date back to the home's original construction. The story goes that the house was built in the 1930s, not long before Stanwyck purchased it, reflecting an era when the film industry was blossoming and Spanish Revival architecture was in vogue. But it wasn't just about fashion. Architects of the period sought to adapt the Spanish influences to the Californian climate, integrating courtyards, thick adobe walls, and breezeways to make the most of natural light and ventilation. If you were to walk along those arches at sunset, feeling the temperature drop as the sky turned lilac, you'd experience a slice of living history, a design that shaped much of early Los Angeles's residential identity. That's precisely the intangible value realtors and historians talk about, the confluence of cinematic heritage and architectural rarity. Owning a piece of that story, especially one inhabited by a star as singular as Barbara Stanwyck, carries a certain romanticism. There's a sense that the walls themselves might hold echoes of script rehearsals, post-photo shoot sighs of relief, or shared laughter with a close confidant. It's a sensation that doesn't translate directly into dollars and cents, but it adds a sheen that's impossible to replicate in new developments. Stanwyck's entire life trajectory can, in some ways, be seen in how she approached this home. She was famously quoted saying, "I never go out unless I look like Barbara Stanwyck." While that line hints at her dedication to poise and polish, she was always, in some sense, on. Her house was the flip side. Here, she could be the version of herself that needed no public performance. It was rumored she'd let her hair down, slip into casual clothes, and perhaps even forego makeup, because in this private canyon retreat, the only one she needed to please was herself. Hollywood might have demanded a particular image, but in Fryman Canyon, she answered only to the rhythms of the desert evenings and her own quiet preferences. In an industry obsessed with attention, Barbara Stanwyck sought silence. She made choices that many might find paradoxical. Why build a beautiful estate in a prime location, only to share it with so few people? Yet it was precisely the tranquility that allowed her to keep her strength and resilience intact, qualities that famously shone through in her roles. She was the hard-edged woman who could dispatch a villain with a single glare on screen, and in real life, she was the caretaker of an orange grove and an immaculate garden. Rather than orchestrating elaborate publicity stunts or extravagant parties, she chose a simpler life, preserving her energy for the roles that truly mattered. Her home wasn't just a piece of real estate, it was the embodiment of her philosophy: privacy, self-reliance, and the freedom to exist on her own terms. As we reflect on the intangible legacy she left behind, we might ask ourselves what we would do with such a property if given the chance. Would we keep the old beams, the terracotta floors, and the orchard of orange trees? Would we transform the courtyard into something sleek and modern, losing that classic charm in the process? Or would we maintain it precisely as Stanwyck did, honoring her wish for a space that nurtured a quieter side of life? Fryman Canyon might be just another hillside to some, prime real estate for a star-studded city, but for Stanwyck, it symbolized the comfort of being unobserved, the joy of being out of earshot from the constant murmur of the paparazzi. And that brings us to the question she might have asked herself countless times, especially after stepping back from full-time stardom. Is the spotlight worth giving up if you can trade it for serenity? Stanwyck, by all indications, answered yes. She had already conquered the box office, played unforgettable roles, and earned both fame and fortune. What she really needed in the end was a place to call her own, a fortress that would keep the world at a respectful distance while she collected her thoughts, recharged her spirit, and decided which script to tackle next. She wasn't concerned with living in a giant mansion that would impress the tabloids. Instead, she found comfort in whitewashed walls, aged tiles, and the warm glow of a canyon sunset. Her final years in that hacienda, or whichever iteration of it she last inhabited, cast a long shadow over Hollywood real estate lore. People still wonder who eventually bought the property, how it might have changed hands, and whether it's remained in good condition. Some claim a few lucky owners recognized its history and left the main structures untouched, carefully preserving the Spanish Revival details. Others worry that it may have been partially remodeled, losing some of the authenticity that made it so distinctly Stanwyck. But the truth is, no matter what physical changes the house might have undergone, its essence, what it meant to its most famous occupant, can't entirely be erased. When you stand outside those iron gates, listening to the wind rustling through the canyon, you can still sense the unique calm that Barbara Stanwyck sought. You can picture her stepping onto the courtyard at dawn, maybe wearing a cozy robe and slippers, sipping a cup of coffee while the sun broke over the hills. You can practically hear the gentle clop of a horse's hooves from a painting in the living room. Even if you've never seen a single one of her westerns, or her searing performance in Double Indemnity, you'd feel her presence in the hush that lingers. Throughout Hollywood's history, countless celebrities have built monumental homes and then sold them off when fortunes changed or bigger mansions came along. But Stanwyck's approach seems uniquely timeless. She opted for comfort, a hint of grandeur, and a lot of solitude. She poured herself into the orchard and the garden, just as she had poured herself into her roles. Visitors rarely overstayed their welcome, not because she was unwelcoming, but because the estate was meant to be a personal retreat, a place to exhale, not to entertain the masses. In a world where self-promotion has become the norm, her choice feels refreshingly grounded. When we watch her old films now, any shot of those piercing eyes, the subtle twists of her mouth, the unwavering confidence in her posture, it's easy to forget that Stanwyck was a deeply private person. As she stepped off the soundstage and drove up to Fryman Canyon, she left behind the mythos of Barbara Stanwyck, the star, and embraced the tranquility of Barbara, the individual. She might have lived alone after her divorce, but that solitude seems to have fueled her unbreakable spirit rather than diminished it. She cultivated a life that balanced independence and introspection in a town not exactly known for either. In the end, the memory of that Spanish Revival hideaway endures as a testament to the idea that sometimes what we value most isn't the thing that draws crowds, but the intangible sense of peace that comes with guarding one's own boundaries. Barbara Stanwyck knew exactly who she was, a consummate professional who also craved freedom from the pressures of being perpetually in the spotlight. Her sanctuary was more than a collection of rooms and courtyards. It was an outward expression of the calm she carried inside. And now, maybe you're picturing yourself in her shoes, hearing the question ring out across the decades. Would you trade the spotlight for serenity, just like she did? There's no right or wrong answer, but it's worth pausing to consider in a world that still adores fame. For Barbara Stanwyck, the answer led her to this quiet domain hidden in Fryman Canyon, a place where she could finally stand still, look out at the valley below and feel wholly herself. No cameras rolling, no lines to deliver, just the quiet rustle of the wind through the orange trees and the knowledge that she was home.